On the flight deck, crews are now manning for the next launch. It's time to clear the flight deck and catwalks. Stand well clear of all jet blasts, prop arcs, and exhaust. It's time to start up the GO aircraft. Let's start them up!
Hi, I'm Dave Baranek, call sign Bio. I was an F-14 Rio and a Top Gun instructor, and I'm one of your hosts for the F-14 Tomcats. Today, we're talking Operation Desert Storm, which started in January 1991. It was a landmark in modern warfare, and the Tomcat played an important role. Our guests are F-14A air crews who flew in Desert Storm, and we'll get their insights and opinions on taking the big fighter into combat.
Thanks, Bio. And I'm Craig Snyder, call sign Crunch. I was an F-14 pilot, Top Gun instructor, and I'm your co-host here on the F-14 Tomcast. Today, our guests are a pilot and a Rio who are both in VF-84, the Jolly Rogers, while deployed aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt, who flew Desert Storm missions from the Persian Gulf. Our pilot is Jim Matheson, call sign Fuzzy. Now Rio, Brian Wood, call sign Woody. So let's hear their story. Fuzzy, Woody, welcome, and thanks for being on the F-14 Tomcast.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here. Good to see you again, Woody.
Yep. Nice seeing you, Fuzzy. Nice seeing you guys, too. Thank you.
Hey, for each one of you, we want to hear where you're from, how you got commissioned, and how you got into naval aviation, and then into F-14s. So, Fuzzy, let's start with you.
Sure. As the youngin', I was going to defer to age, but I'll dive in here.
Man, it's already starting. This is going to be good.
Fight's on.
Absolutely. You said Fort Greene, so we're go. So I went to the Naval Academy class of 87. I went to the academy from just south of Cleveland, Ohio. And then I went right on down to Pensacola. And between Pensacola and Kingsville, Texas, it took me about 2 years to get my wings. And then I was fortunate enough to then go up to the VF-101 Grim Reapers, went through the RAG, and then I joined VF-84 in probably May, June of 1990. So when we get to the Desert Storm time, I was a brand new nugget. I was one of the newest pilots in the squadron, and actually Woody and I flew together quite a bit. We can get to that. So I was really fortunate, I think, relative to some of my Naval Academy classmates. I had folks that were going to West Coast F-14 community who weren't even through the RAG yet. Some of them, my classmates from the Naval Academy, didn't even have their wings by the time I'd come back from my first deployment. So I was super lucky to get down to Pensacola, up to Oceana, into a great squadron and out into a combat operating environment in my first 2-3 years out of the academy. So it was fantastic.
Woody.
Yeah. So my father was a Naval Academy grad. He was a fighter pilot, flew in Korean War. In fact, we were both in the same squadron, VF-24. So that was kind of neat. I carried on the family tradition. Went to the Naval Academy. Went down to Pensacola. Wanted to fly because of vision. Had to be a Rio, but that was fine. And was assigned to VF-124 on the West Coast RAG out of VT-86, and then joined VF-24. In fact, Bio, you and I were shipmates for cruise, and then after that, after VF-24, I went to the East Coast, was an instructor at VF-101, the East Coast RAG, and then had my department head tour in VF-84, where I met Fuzzy.
And the rest is history, I guess.
That's right. I think that's a wrap.
So in 1991, then, Fuzzy, you were a department head. And I'm sorry, Woody, you were a department head. And Fuzzy, you were a JO on your first Nugget tour. Is that right?
Well, I thought I was a department head, but it turns out I was just a branch officer. Yeah, that's right.
I'm familiar with the feeling. I got you. Yeah. But
yeah,
is that right, Woody? You were a department head?
Yeah, I was the operations officer up into just as we headed over to Desert Storm. I turned over ops.
Oh wow. Okay. So so I'm just to set the stage for all of our listeners and watchers. As the operations officer, you're deeply involved in basically setting the stage and making sure that the squadron is prepared and ready to go into battle, ready to go to war. You probably were incredibly involved and making sure that everybody had the training they need. You had the ordnance or whatever you needed between you and the maintenance and the admin to make sure everybody's ready to go. Is that a fair statement?
Yep. Hang on one second.
And he'll cut this all out.
He'll leave it in. Definitely leave this in.
It's exactly.
It's
We're
good
going to tweet out a few of those.
good for the bloopers reel. Yeah. So, question again was about ops and maintenance. So, ops and maintenance work hand in hand, getting the squadron ready. The operations department obviously working the air crew, getting them ready to go out and do the fight. Maintenance is getting the aircraft ready so the air crew has them available. And that was a big item in August of 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait. We had been getting ready to go on a short Northern Atlantic cruise up to Norway for about a month and a half and then come back. That was canceled, and all of our training, everything turned into overland and desert type environments that we thought we might see in Iraq. And so between August and December, when we deployed, that was our main focus.
Okay, so one little detail, Woody, I think you said that you left ops as you were going over. So what did you rotate to?
Yeah, so I became the Airwing Tarps officer or recon officer.
Oh, that's good.
Basically, I was kept on there and kept in the squadron. So kind of a collateral duty was to be the Airwing Tarps officer.
Okay, cool. So once, I mean, we're going to figure that the audience is basically familiar with the background of Iraq invading Kuwait, as you said, and then Desert Shield and Desert Storm. So we're not we don't want you guys to go over a lot of that stuff as we talk. We are going to want you to focus on the Tomcat, but you started to hint at it once the invasion happened, and your North Atlantic deployment was canceled. Did you just say, okay, we are definitely going to war. Let's get all the training we can? Was that the attitude in the Air Wing?
Yes. Yeah, it was. We were scheduled for our regular deployment in the end of December anyway. So we kept continuing on towards that. We just took that Northern Atlantic part out. And but, the focus wasn't nearly as much as of a Fifth Fleet Persian Gulf type event. It was the previous cruise had been a Mediterranean love boat cruise, and so that was kind of in our minds what it was going to be again. And we did a hard shift to, hey, we need some overland training. We need to figure out what it is we might be doing in Iraq when we go over there. And we knew pretty much immediately that, yes, we would be heading over there.
So did you guys go to Fallon? Did you sneak out a trip to Fallon, or just do all kinds of El Centro? What other places did you go to?
Yeah, not El Centro. Since we were on the East Coast, it was harder to get overland training. I think we did send some planes out to Fallon. We had already had our Airwing Fallon trip. We had already passed that. In fact, I think that might have even been before Fuzzy joined the squad.
It was, yeah.
At the time. And but we were able to find some overland training sites so that we were able to do some radar work and overland air combat maneuvering training, things of that nature.
So Fuzzy, what about you? You're a JO in your first Tomcat squadron, and 2 months after you joined, there's a war on the horizon.
Yeah, it was exciting. I mean, so joining the squadron, I was going to be one of the last JOs, the crews to join. A couple of other folks from my time frame from the training command and VF 101 all joined. And I would say that we had Streak Chanik as our skipper and Woodie coming out of the RAG. I mean, the group of folks that they had assembled at VF 84 was just an awesome group of people. It fully, I think, appreciated in retrospect. I know we all have our great squadrons we've been involved with, but I think that group of folks and that talent that was assembled was awesome. So showing up there was, like any JO, was all about what's going on, what do I got to do to add value to the squadron. So there's sort of the operational bit, and then just the flying. We started doing some workups, and they said early on, I got crewed with Woodie and some of the other more senior Rios, and I was really fortunate. I got to go through Tarps training as a relatively young pilot, so I went through Tarps training pretty soon after joining the squadron, and that turned out to be a great mission set we should come back to for Desert Storm, and then our 93 cruise to Bosnia as well. So that was cool. So I spent a lot of time, for me, focused as we were getting ready for the workups, is getting up on the step on the recon work, cameras, a lot of low-level flying. And Woody and I were talking last week and remembering, I mean, eventually, as Crunch knows well, the Tomcat became a great air-to-ground platform. You've talked about that in some of your previous sessions. And we did a little bit of that bombcatting. Never did get sort of fully qualled prior to the 91 cruise, but we did spend some time thinking about that environment. And then, we pushed out right after Christmas in 1990. And I think everybody, we've been following current events, and there was a lot of movement, a lot of aircraft carriers that were already forward deployed, a lot of moving out from both coasts into the region. So I think we were fired up, and I think we felt like we were ready. And then we'll get to the transland, but we went basically from heavy training to we're getting on the ship day or two after Christmas 1990, and we had to be in the Persian Gulf. We ended up getting there less than 3 weeks later, so we did very little flying between the time we left and the time we actually got to the Persian Gulf, which is pretty interesting. So we can talk about when we arrived on station and such, but it definitely took us a little bit of time, at least for me as a nugget. I felt like I was pretty on the step in December, and then a few weeks of not flying. It took a little bit of time to get accustomed to the environment and being back around the ship after a few weeks. But I think we were pretty ready.
They perished. That's very perishable stuff. So
especially as a young JO, where it's all about reps around the boat, tactically working with your crew. But it was pretty cool.
You don't have a lot of muscle memory to fall back on. Go ahead, Crunch. Sorry.
I was going to ask. So, what was the Airwing composition like on that deployment?
Yeah.
What were the different squadrons?
We had two F-14 squadrons, Jolly Rogers and VF-41 Black Aces. We had two Hornet squadrons, VFA-15, VFA-87. We had a couple A6 squadrons, and then we had an EA6 squadron, E2 squadron, S3 squadron, and then helos as well. So it was interesting because we had a lot of firepower. So we had two Tomcat, two Hornet, two A6 squadrons. So those guys, especially the Hornets and the A6s, delivered a lot of ordnance on target.
Wow! Now that just for listeners, that second A6 squadron is unusual in my experience. To have six fighter and attack squadrons. I'm used to 5 or even 4 in some air wings. So that's cool. They loaded you guys up.
Yeah.
So what was the attitude on the ship as you're sailing over? Is everybody just gung ho, excited, and all that?
I would say a definite yes. I think the feeling was as the start of Desert Storm was approaching, we knew the date that everything was approaching. I think there was worry that we were going to be left out, that we weren't going to get there in time, and we kind of didn't. We made it through, as Fuzzy said. We left the rest of our battle group in our wake, and got over there quickly. Went through the Suez Canal, raced around the edge, and the war actually started when we were off the coast of Oman, getting ready to get in the Persian Gulf. And we got in, I think that night, next morning.
Yep.
But we wanted to participate. We wanted to be able to put forth what we had trained to do, and we were hoping that. I think a lot of people are thinking that this thing was going to be over in a couple days. Obviously not, but I think that was the initial thought by people as we're headed over.
And once you did that, correct me if I'm wrong, you were not the only carrier on the scene.
Correct. We were. I think we were either the last or second. I think we might have been the second last carrier to get over there. We were the third carrier to be in the Gulf. And then I think America came after us and was in the Red Sea for a while before they came over and joined us in the Gulf, where we had 4 carriers for most of Desert Storm.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it's not. The Persian Gulf is not a huge body of water, so there was a lot of activity. I mean, obviously a lot of activity around the whole of the of the operating airspace, even Red Sea aircraft coming all the way over to Kuwait and what have you. So it was a busy operating environment, and the Persian Gulf in particular, with 3 and then 4 carriers, there was a lot
Yeah.
happening there. So I think it took probably, I just remember, a few days to kind of get again situated. But once I think the air wing and then the other air wings and all the Red Crown, whereas the controllers and the folks on the ships figured things out. By the end of the first week was a bit chaotic, as I remember. It was like, I think everybody was trying to situate what was going on. We flew those initial strikes, but after about a week or so, I think the air wing, myself, felt like the whole of the Persian Gulf started to settle into, I wouldn't say a routine, but I think we started to figure things out pretty quickly.
Okay, so we'll come back to those first strikes, but real quick, you use the term Red Crown. So tell, just for people who don't have the historical background, tell everybody what that is.
Yeah, so if you're operating off the carrier, and essentially it's a mobile air traffic control. So Red Crown often is based on one of the Aegis ships that has really, really high performance radars, and they're tracking all the aircraft coming and going, and they're coordinating with the airborne assets. So we had our own E2C Hawkeyes, basically carrier based airborne air traffic control, and we had the E3s, the big, the big Air Force assets that really had high altitude, big radar. So all those pieces and parts of the air traffic control picture were all integrated, from data link and different sectors that they were tracking, different frequencies that we talked to one another on. So, and our job, and depending on the mission, was to check in and navigate through that air traffic control system, so we could tell, who's friendly, who's foe, who's supposed to be going to, who's supposed to be coming fro, all that kind of stuff.
I can only imagine how chaotic, is that the right word? How
yeah.
I don't know. It'd just be like there's random. It might be a good word as well. People are different altitudes, different directions. I know that there's deconfliction, but all it takes is one person off an altitude. Next thing you know, you're going left to left with somebody you aren't supposed to be. We weren't using night vision goggles yet at this point.
Right.
So nobody had that. Well, none of the fighter guys did. I don't know.
Not the F-14s, right?
Yeah. But most people weren't using that. And, you're trying to work through all those frequencies, and the ships are each given one little box, one little carrier operating area. You had CVOA 1 through 4, if I remember correctly, in the Gulf. You get a couple carriers in the Red Sea. Everybody's moving across. You got the Saudis doing their thing.
Yeah.
And there's just pure chaos, and you got to find your tanker, right? You're like, there's the tanker. No, wrong tanker. It's that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. and don't forget about all of our Air Force friends who, were flying around as well. And we can come to that later of how we actually figured out what we were supposed to do the next 24 hours. But chaos, certainly, I think. But again, I think, Woody, maybe you probably had the big picture sooner than I did, for sure. But it took me about a week, it felt like, to kind of stabilize and figure out how the rhythm of the operating environment.
Yeah, the first couple of flights definitely were chaotic. You made do and you figured out how to get through it, but there was a lot of chaos because everybody was trying to figure it out, not just our air wing or our squadron. The Air Force and everybody's trying to. This was something new for everybody.
Right. Absolutely. Holy cow.
So the war started early in the morning of the 17th. When did TR fly your first combat missions, and when did you guys fly your first combat missions?
So that night, the TR, we ended up being one of the night carriers. And as I said, there are 4 carriers in the Gulf. 2 flew mainly during the day, had some crossover at night. We took off the last couple hours of daylight and mainly flew at night. So a lot of our missions were night related missions. Our first mission, I was crewed up with Marty Chanick-Streak, who was on your earlier episode talking about VF1 days. And he and I were walking down the passageway, and the CAG jumped out in the hall and said, "Hey, Streak, you're going out tonight." And that was it. We had about 2 hours to prepare for the mission. So everything that you learn in Top Gun, everything you learn in training, that, okay, you got to go through and plan everything out, and everything be nice and be very perfect. We're sitting there jumping through our hats, trying to get all the information we could, because we knew that we were going to be launching in 2 hours, and we had we didn't even know what the mission was yet. So we found out what our mission was going to be. We were going to escort an Air Force EF-111 who was taking off out of Saudi Arabia. We were going to take a section of F-14s, Marty Chanik and myself, and then we had Kurt Krautdale and Tom Smutheim were our wingmen. And also an EA-6B was going to launch. So we were the first 3 aircraft from the Theodore Roosevelt to launch into Desert Storm. If you want, would you like me to continue on with the mission? Okay. So we launched. First thing we had to do was get airborne and get some gas. The KC-135s were right where they said they were going to be. The mission itself was to take some gas. However, the 135s were in the goo, so we had to do a little radar approach onto the 135s. We found them just as we're getting ready to tank with the 135s. We hear on, I don't know if it was on guard or on quad 3, we heard a friendly voice of someone we knew from VF2 who was on the Ranger, said, "Woodie, Streak, welcome to Desert Storm." And it was, anyway, it was a guy.
You can use his call sign.
Okay. Well, it was a guy. It was a guy from VF2. Let's say that. But it was nice to hear a friendly voice, and it was Dave Possum Cully. And but here we are we're fighting the tanker in the goo, and we get someone chatting with us on there. But that was of interest. Headed out west to Saudi Arabia, south of Kuwait, as our kind of entry point, and we make it to our area where we're going to meet the EF-111. We never actually see them, but we are in the same approximate vicinity. This is all in support of a strike, and the strike goes at the designated time. By this time, everything's dark. As we're flying to our waypoint to start, all of a sudden our wingman gets lit up on his raw gear, and first thing Streak and I know about it, we hear him call braking right. We see flares flashing off in the darkness, and we're going, "What the hell's going on?" And then he comes back, and we didn't receive anything on our raw gear. And it looks like it was just a bad indication, but that was a nice way to get started.
Okay, so are you guys still in the weather, or do you have a horizon? Or
no, we have a horizon at this
okay,
point.
Good.
In fact, we're at 40,000 feet, so we're above everything. And then once you got over land, everything kind of cleared up.
40,000 feet in an F-14A.
That's right.
Yeah, prime operating environment. Right?
Unafraid.
At night.
That's right. That's right. He put his 1.5 G right brake in. So as we got to our start point, headed north, and we were full burners. Lights were off, so we had no lights. Just had our form lights on, and so you could see your wingman based on the afterburner or on his form lights. And started.
So for the audience, those are the little green strip lights that are on certain parts of the airplane. Okay. And you can tell from his afterburner. That's a good way.
That's right. That was a better way to tell where he was.
Yeah.
As we're headed north, just in my mind, you know how your mind works. I saw everything going off, and it just reminded me of like a 4th of July, because all of the Iraqi AAA was just coming up into the air at various altitudes, and some of it was coming up to our altitude, and so you just saw it going off everywhere, and it was quite impressive, and it was also going, okay, we don't want to be heading that direction. We don't want to go that direction. But as we're going north, we're jinking back and forth, heading left and right, just flying our good defensive flight. Streak obviously did a great job. Went up there, we got to our end point, did a 180 and started heading back south. And same thing, jinking back and forth, no level flight, just up and down, left and right. and we finally get back to our endpoint. At this point, we're headed east to go to rejoin the aircraft carrier. As we head out to the Gulf, we get some sort of warnings, and check your IFF. We did. Everything was on and good. We made it to the tanker, came back and landed. So it was about a 4.5 hour mission or so, and came back and landed. By this time, the whole carrier is pretty much asleep, and I was looking for the band to welcome us back, but they weren't there. Went into the ready room, did our debrief, and at that point we got called saying, "Hey, they're getting ready to shoot you guys down." And we found out that some of the folks on the surface ships were a little trigger happy. They wanted to shoot us down because they weren't convinced that we weren't bad guys exiting the area. So that was nice to find out after the fact.
Well, and there were some blue on blues during Desert Storm. So
yeah, it was. So we made it back safely. That was the first mission. Probably lost about 5 pounds in sweat, and but it was worked out well, and everything started to improve from there. The missions were a little bit more organized, had more time to brief them, and things went well.
Oh, that's good. That is good. What a great opening night story. That's good. Okay, so Fuzzy, let's talk about your first one.
Yeah, and I a little hazy, but the first 2 missions I remember were quite different. The first one both were daylight. And I think the first one I was involved with was, I think we had a strike lead from VFA 15, and we were supposed to go up and hit some targets in Basra. And so we were operating Persian Gulf, so it was mostly like our footprint over that whole time frame was mostly kind of Kuwait City, east, southeast Iraq, Basra, and such. So they dropped a lot of ordnance, especially in around the Basra area. Republican Guard was entrenched. A whole bunch of stuff was happening there. So we were kind of a big strike package. And the image I remember was, we had at that point trying to figure out the sort of integrated air defense picture, which is both the AAA and SAMs, that surface to air missiles that Woodie was talking about, but also, Iraqis had a lot of aircraft, and so that was something we were trying to figure out over that first week. And fast forward, eventually, most everything that they flew either got shot down or got absconded by the Iranians across the border over time. But that first week or so, there was still a lot of sorting out to do, whether or not there was going to be an air-to-air threat. So the F-14 had its classic mission set, was making sure that the skies were A-OK for the strike guys to come in and drop ordnance. So I just remember going up through the Basra Valley, and we were same kind of idea, probably mid 35,000 feet, just kind of cruising along, working the radar. There's not much happening on the radar, but I remember the idea of like we're moving just to make sure that we were dynamic in the air and that we weren't an easy target. But also kind of looking down and going, this is the beginning of civilization, the Mesopotamian river valley. There was nothing there, right? Well, you could see some water, but no signs that was once the beginnings and cradle of human civilization. So I remember that sort of dichotomy in my mind. Okay, we're jigging and jiving here, trying to do our thing. We're going to go drop some ordnance or support our shipmates are going to do that, and then thinking about the history of the place. So I remember that image clearly, and I think the next day or two we started doing some Tarps missions where you talked so strategically the role of the F-14 and carrying the reconnaissance pod, but there just wasn't a lot of good imaging assets, and so the F-14 became a really important asset in theater, and Woodie was running that for the Airwing, and we liaisoned a lot with the other. There was one F-14 squadron in every Airwing was Tarps enabled, so we had a half a dozen or maybe 8 aircraft in all of the Persian Gulf that could fly these Tarps pods, because not every aircraft in every F-14 squadron was Tarps enabled. So the first Tarps mission I remember was kind of flying along, kind of northbound along the coast of Kuwait. We were trying to get a little bit of a sight picture of what the Kuwait coast looked like and things like that. And we did a lot more. We did dozens, probably even a couple hundred, I would think, Woodie, over time frame Tarps missions during the Desert Storm time frame. But I remember kind of flying up the coast, and the Tarps camera had a camera you could look straight down. It also had an infrared camera. We should come back and talk about that because that was actually a really interesting asset later on. But it also had an oblique camera where you kind of stood off and you could image somewhat at a distance, and you had to get the altitude and the angles and all that kind of thing right. So I remember flying up, the coast of Kuwait, and it was like kind of little flashes and stuff, and we assumed it was AAA, but we were far enough away and at high enough altitude. And again, one of those surreal experiences of we're kind of flying up the coast, trying to make sure we're in the right situation, the right position to get the imagery, but also looking at, probably folks down on the ground very interested in what we were doing and probably taking shots well outside of lethal range. But that's when it kind of clued in, okay, we're in a situation here where, the folks on the ground don't want us here. So you kind of get into that mindset that you got to start being thoughtful and careful and making sure you're doing the right kind of things. And we'll talk over the conversation here about things that the Airwing learned over time. And we actually lost some aircraft based on some things we probably weren't paying close enough attention to early on in the whole environment.
What is that? Let's talk about that now. Are we talking AAA? Are we talking SAM threat?
I think all the above, and also the fact that the threat didn't end, at the coastline, right? We lost an A6 crew. I think best that I recall was, you were thinking that once you got feet wet, once you're out in the Persian Gulf, again, you're away from the land environment, that you're quote unquote safe. It turned out that the Iraqis had deployed folks with shoulder launch SAM, so smaller mobile surface air missiles on all these oil derricks. There were just hundreds and hundreds of oil derricks out in the Persian Gulf, because that's
terrible. They got shot down, feet wet.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what happened is you kind of pushed over and started getting into the low altitude environment out over the water, where I think folks thought they were more safe, and it turned out that wasn't the case.
I think they lost the crew?
We did. We lost an A6 crew, lost the aircraft and both of the crew members.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah. Just so anybody knows, like a shoulder launch missile, typically called a man pad. Like in the U.S., we have Stingers, those types of things. You could be out on an oil rig, or you could be on a small boat, and that thing can shoot 10, 15, sometimes even 20,000 feet above the shooter's altitude. So you talk about low altitude, it's actually low medium in some cases if they can see you. And I've actually played around with them. It's incredibly easy to pull it up, sight through it, get the IR lock and fire that thing off. It's not hard, and it's a real easy way to get somebody if they're not paying it, if they are unaware that you're down there, because there's no indication. It's completely passive. You're not going to be able to see it coming, and it's completely, and not to mention, if I may, I was the surface to air threat guy at Top Gun, right? And so we used to talk about this a lot, that for the folks who are listening to audio only, you will not get to appreciate what I'm about to do, but you're about to get shot at by a Bic pen. So as the Bic pen is launched and it's coming directly at the camera, you can notice that you can't see this thing at all. It's so small. It doesn't look like that going through the air. It looks like that. And as it's coming straight at you, it's very small. You aren't going to see there's no smoke trail. It just pops off. It's a little dot. And shoot, I can't see an airplane half the time if I don't have my cheaters on. You're not going to see that thing. It's going to bag you real quick. So,
well, it's funny you're doing that. You're doing that, Crunch. I remember, I think it was Lang Sias had the surface to air lecture back when I was on the staff, and this whole idea, like, okay, you got your pen coming at you, and like, well, if it's going out in front of you, it's tracking you. If it's like, I can't even see the thing. There's no way I can tell whether it's tracking me. I'm just, any indication that this thing's coming at me, I'm going to start doing something like smut, in crowd. Let's move the aircraft, deploy chaff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So where were we? So yeah, threats. You were talking about threats being feet wet. You could get shot wet, man pads, feet dry. You've got AAA, you've got SAMs. You guys are flying at night. You're not on goggles. You probably, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you were probably getting shot at and didn't even realize it because you don't even see it coming up, right? I mean,
yeah, it's a lot of activity. It was, I think, hard to tell, as Woody said. It's hard to tell, is it coming at you? Is it not? I mean, the F-14 has the electronic warning systems. They weren't the best in class, but they were, they were pretty tuned. And I think, to the maintainers, I think, our maintenance crew did an amazing job getting our aircraft ready. And for an aircraft, and you guys have covered this in previous podcasts, the F-14 is a wonderful aircraft, but it has its, share of maintenance challenges. But I would say that overall, the readiness of the aircraft, the performance of the system, especially the defensive systems, was great. So they worked pretty well. But you're right, you can't tell. And also the other thing in that first week, I mean, Scott Spiker gets shot down. Different people. So we're definitely winning big time, but we're also across the whole theater. We're losing some folks, and we're trying to figure out exactly how capable are the Iraqi forces in this first handful of days. So I think people are really trying to calibrate at that point. I don't know, Woody, what if you remember that?
We also lost the only F-14 from VF 103. They got shot down. Pretty incredible story, survival story by the pilot,
right?
Boots Jones, and then Larry Slade, the Rio, was captured and was POW for the rest of the war. But all of that, and then we also lost an F-18, one of our CAG LSOs. They think something happened where the aircraft was shot, but he just disappeared from the screen, and they never found where he went. So I think that was, even though, as Fuzzy says, we were, things were going well, we were still having some negative things happen. And I think that started to get to people that, hey, we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing, but some bad stuff is still happening. And we ended up having a memorial service for the 3 Airwing mates who died, and because it was within a day or two of each other. And I think
did you have that during the campaign, or did you have that later?
During the campaign. We took an afternoon off.
Wow.
Yeah, and had this because I think they could see that it was starting to affect people. It was affecting the Roosevelt Airwing especially. So we took it off, had our hour and a half, and then all of a sudden I think that kind of turned things around for the wing. Now, if I could throw in a counter story to that, so there was of course, all the admirals, as soon as they from the 4 carriers, as soon as they got over there, they all got their data rank out, wanted to see who was the senior admiral. Turns out it was the admiral from Midway. And so I think he felt like after we had lost these 2 aircraft, he needed to come out and give us a attaboy, pump us up. So he came over around, I'd say around 1 o'clock in the afternoon or so, maybe noon, and had all the Airwing gather on the forecastle. Well, with us being the night carrier, 12 p.m., 1 p.m., that's the middle of our REM time. And so it was not much appreciated. He was the butt of many jokes on scheduled cartoons, on airplanes, stuff like that. But it was, one of those things you just kind of shake your head and go, all right, what were they thinking? But
okay, I'm going to explain airplane cartoons and flight schedule cartoons for the non-Navy guys. The flight schedules and the airplanes were, internal documents, and so they had irreverent, very pointed, and hilarious cartoons. Was a tradition. I mean,
well. Moving on. So, we're getting through the first week. Obviously, the Desert Storm went for several weeks, right? So talk
6 weeks, about probably 6 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk us through you were doing Tarps missions. You were doing, some fighter escort missions. Did you ever have any air-to-air encounters yourselves or anybody in the squadron or the Airwing?
So, yes, there were 2 encounters. One was actually during Desert Storm, and a lot of our other missions that we haven't mentioned yet were some sort of cap. We were some sort of barrier cap off the coast, or after a while, after things settled down over land, we had some overland cap as well.
And what were they trying to cap against? Iranian or Iraqi or what?
No, Iranians were never, they were always considered as a wild card, but I don't think they were ever really considered the main threat. It was just in case the Iraqis tried to fly. I think the biggest threat became the Iraqis trying to fly their planes out of Iraq into Iran. And so we were kind of capping against them. So our sister squadron had a mission where there was an Iraqi aircraft that was flying and airborne, and everybody was going, yep, there it is, there it is. Well, unfortunately, they didn't have their radar was not working, and so basically they could not do anything about it. They couldn't find the aircraft. They would have been given the clear to fire had they found it, but they didn't find it. And
how frustrating!
Fairly senior pilot and Rio. So in fact, I think anyway. So that was one that was disappointing for the whole air wing. And then this is a post Desert Storm, but because we were the last carrier there, we were supposed to be on cruise. We just stayed in the area. After all the carriers went home, we stayed in the area. So we continued to fly what became Southern Watch and then provide comfort. The missions up in the north, we supported that for another 4 months after Desert Storm was over. And Marty Chanik and I, Streak, were flying an overland cap by solo in Iraq, and we got a helo on radar, and so went down. It was flying fast. At this point, the Iraqis are not supposed to be flying any aircraft, and pretty much if they were, aircraft were getting the clearance to fire to shoot at them. So we went down and did a flyby. It was either a hind or a hip, I can't remember, but it was definitely an Iraqi aircraft flying at 100 feet or so, and trying to get, we're passing that on to our the E3 that was controlling us, and they would not give us the clearance to fire. So that we kind of lost our opportunity there, but that's what happened.
So before we get too far away, during Desert Storm, what was your? I mean, that's heartbreaking right there to see an enemy airplane. So
yeah,
I don't want to dwell on that. Before we, what was there a typical loadout for you guys during Desert Storm?
Yeah. So initially, because we're all good Top Gun trained men, we loaded out with, I think we started off with a Phoenix, had 2 Sparrows and 2 Winders, perhaps.
122, maybe, or probably 221 or 222, something like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, in fact, we might even had a couple missions where we had 2 Phoenix on board. And then after a few missions, we're going, well, this is not doing this any good. We're not going to be able to use this for anything. So we went to 4 and 4 after that, Sparrows and Sidewinders, and
cool.
Pretty much that. I think the rest of the time, perhaps even went to 2 and 4, depending on what our mission was. But
yeah, and the Tarps would normally be kind of 2 and 2, and then the Tarps pod sat in the belly, kind of on one of the aft Phoenix stations. That was a good mix. And we probably have like a 4 and 4 on the the wingman for the Tarps. That was a pretty standard configuration. Go back to Woodie's point. So if you look at the map, we talked about this Mesopotamia river valley, but there's a shared and historically contested border between Iraq and Iran, right? And the theory was that the Iraqis had made a deal. Hey, if we move our aircraft over to Iran, it'll be safe storage. And then when this thing's all over, we'll go back and get them, and you give them back to us. I don't know what happened. I'm not sure any of those aircraft ever made it back across the border after all this was said and done. But there was a lane cap, and it was essentially this barrier cap to try to keep those aircraft from going over, because the idea was we want them in our theater of op, and we want to destroy them all. So that was a good mission, except that the Air Force, I think, controlled most of the air tasking order, and so they usually got the daylight lane cap stuff. So those folks, that was a pretty target rich environment for the F-15 drivers over on the side of Iraq. And Woodie and I were remembering, the tasking would come down. We didn't have like this long strategic plan. You had like a 24-hour op order that came in over the telex and the fax, like 2:00 in the morning. So everybody would be hanging around and wait for the air tasking order to come through. And then it was the air tasking order for the whole theater. It wasn't like today's where you got a nice little email to the TR battle group. Hey, here's your tasking. This stuff was coming over. You had to sort through all your line items and figure out what missions you were going to fly the next day. And we got pretty routine, and whether they were the barrier cap or some of the strikes that were going on. Then we had several Tarps missions, on a daily basis as well. And those are always fun to do. There was a couple. I did have two to the idea of the air-to-air stuff. I don't think I was unique in this, but to Woodie's earlier comment, the A6s were always trolling around, right? And the EA6s with their jammers, and that was their job to try to create noise for the surface-to-air threats. But that also created issues for us to be able to see their systems and their IFF identification friend or foe. So there was a number of us that did intercepts on our own EA6s. And I can remember one where we did sort of the classic F-14 visual identification where we ran the intercept and offset and used the big television camera system in the front of the F-14 to figure out what the heck we were looking at. And so, but we were probably only 2 or 3 miles away after a 20, 30-mile intercept, figuring out that it was, a friendly aircraft. And so sorting out, we talked earlier, between Red Crown and the E3s and the E2s, trying to make sense of all the aircraft coming and going, especially when the squawks, IFFs weren't working. And there was also another case, and I remember this was later, still Desert Storm, but we were running around doing a Tarps mission, like a 2-ship in Kuwait City, and we had an unknown aircraft flying around. And so we ran an intercept and kind of ended up sort of coming in. They were low altitude headed kind of northeast through, over Kuwait City. And we ran a really nice intercept with the 2-ship, got in a really nice position. Still couldn't tell what it was. We got close enough to see that it had only a single tail. And that got us super excited because most of the fast movers and stuff on our side, other than the A6s, had 2 tails. Long story short, it ended up being an A7 from over one of the Red Sea Airwings. And so we were like super excited. Maybe it was like an Exocet or a MiG or something, like, oh my God, this is going to be great. We're going to be heroic. And to the earlier comment about blue on blue, I mean, that was like, we got within about 2 miles or so, and certainly within a weapon engagement zone. First, you had to figure out what it was. It was low altitude snow, and you could tell what it was, but you had to go through all that process if the Red Crown folks couldn't positively identify it as a friend or a foe. So those were the 2 closest air-to-air excitement points that I came to. And I think everybody had some of those as they went along, but most of the stuff that I spent time doing was in the Tarps regime, which was super fun and cool as well.
And what altitude are you flying around when you're doing those Tarps missions? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, normally being the 10 to 15,000 foot range is pretty optimal for the camera. Yeah, you're kind of putting yourself where you got enough of a camera footprint, and you're trying to put yourself above the threat. But some of them were much lower altitude. We got in later in the Desert Storm timeframe, as I think Saddam Hussein was starting to kind of read the writing on the wall. They lit off all the oil wells. They lit all those off, and it created this massive mess, which is both trying to destroy some of the economic assets of Kuwait, but also created a really difficult operating environment because there was just smoke everywhere. And so we flew a bunch of missions in through that environment, trying to use the infrared camera to figure out how many oil wells were on fire, what the heck was going on. I think the view was just a few, but I think when we brought all that imagery back, and this is probably week 4, probably middle of February, something like that, there was lots of these things on fire. And that was pretty interesting.
They showed up on the Tarps IR, really. I mean,
on the IR stuff, yeah, the infrared stuff, you could actually go in and map them and see what was happening. So most of the time we were 10 or 15,000, either oblique to the target, or often before or after a strike, we were going kind of right over the target area. Because again, we didn't have great imagery. Satellite tasking was what it was. The RF-4, the Air Force asset wasn't there. And so I think that the leadership was really relying a lot on this imagery to figure out what was going on, to figure out what they wanted to drop bombs on, and then actually to get the right commensurated coordinates, actually make sure we're hitting the right kind of things, and then to go in afterwards and do battle damage assessment to make sure that we had hit what we wanted to hit. And then later on, when we actually get past the pure air war, where the ground war was starting to happen, we can come back to that. But then all of a sudden that was happening so fast, trying to use the assets to figure out where the heck the forward line of the battle area was, where the good guys and the bad guys, and it was moving pretty quick. So I think the TARP stuff across the whole F-14 community, both the Red Sea and Persian Gulf, I think was a great mission for the aircraft and for our squadron.
Amazing. Hey, I want to jump in with some information that may be of interest to you if you're watching this podcast. The 2022 F-14 reunion is going to be held in Long Island, New York, April 28th to May 1st, 2022. There's going to be tours, panel discussions, a banquet, and other events. Information can be found on the F-14 Association website. That's f-14association.com. I hope you'll consider attending. Hope to see you there.
So all in all, I mean, it went for several weeks, Desert Storm. How many missions did you guys get personally?
Woody, you just looked at your logbook. Mine's back east in Boston, but I probably did 40 or 50 missions, I would guess, probably. And I was fortunate because I did more of the short Tarp stuff. We had some like 7 and 14 hour cat missions, which were painful. Great way to get hours, but it's a hard way to get hours. We had a couple like double cycles. I think the standard cycle is like a 7-hour, cat mission. Woody and I can come back later and talk about our night cat mission later, and everybody was so tired.
There's no time like the present.
We did one of these barrier caps later, which is probably in the last week, and we were sort of positioned south of Baghdad, probably
the last week of the war or the last week of the deployment.
Yeah, last week of the war. Yeah, because this was just in the Persian Gulf environment. As Woody said, we chopped out of the Persian Gulf through the Red Sea where we did some stuff, and then eventually ended up for the last 4 months of the cruise off the coast of Syria and Turkey, and we're flying north into the northern part of Iraq, which is actually a really exciting and interesting part of the cruise as well. But at this point, we're in the last week of Desert Storm, so probably late February, and everybody's tired. I mean, we're doing night ops. So one thing I remember is just being tired all the time. And Woody and I were out on, I think it was supposed to be a 5, 6, 7 hour mission, and we were toward the end of that. I was so tired. So we made the deal where, okay, listen, Woody, I'll be as we're heading north, I'm gonna close my eyes, you work the radar, and then we're in 2 ships. So we're off of our flight lead, and just keep an eye on them. And when we're ready to turn, just wake me up, and we'll turn south, and you get a nap, and then I'll pay attention. And so this is working great, right up until the point where both of us fell asleep as we were headed north, and lost sight of the flight leads. Kind of on me. I'm supposed to be the one keeping track of this, but we both kind of micro dozed there for a little bit. And then on the radar, so we're now tracking north, well past our cap position. We've lost sight of the flight lead. Our E3 is like going, what the hell are you guys doing? So Woody and I had a rude awakening. We're like, afterburner, what are you working the radar, trying to find our flight lead? I think we woke up pretty quickly at that point, and that when it hit the tanker yet again. Is that how you remember it, Woody?
Yeah, the part about it being your fault, yes, I remember. But it was that was it was actually the night they shut down Desert Storm. It was the last flight. Of the no more flights after that in Desert Storm, and we were just both so tired that we fell asleep, and it was a very interesting way to end the Desert Storm.
Yeah. I do remember that. I remember coming back, Woody, because I think the sun was just starting to come up as we recovered. That was like, I thank you for remembering that. I remember that mission, and then coming back and landing just as the sun was coming up. It was pretty cool.
Crunch, have you ever fallen asleep in an F-14 while flying?
If I did, I don't remember.
I think people find that hard to believe. I fell asleep in a jet one time, but it was on a cross country in the United States. But
it was, I don't know, as a pilot, a lot of times the autopilot's not working. So
Yeah.
There's a little more involvement, but it certainly could have happened. I remember a story when I was over in theater of a Hornet guy falling asleep one time, and he woke up, but
I remember when I was a Nugget back in 24, a pilot in Rio fell asleep in Marshall, and they were headed outbound, and they woke up.
Oh, no. Where the hell are we?
Yeah, we just
gonna make your push time.
Make your push time using burner. Okay, so getting back to the war, as you guys are going over, and at the start of the war, obviously there's a lot of just learning curves and all that, but what were you expecting to do as Tomcat Squadron? Did you think you were going to go in there guns blazing, AUG-9s, and launch Phoenix and all that? Or did you think it's not going to happen? Or what'd you think?
Yeah, I don't think we thought we're going to. We were hoping that we would have the opportunity to go guns blazing, but I think we were just going over there and trying to execute what we had been taught, all the training we had gone through, which, from my point, the training that we had done during the turnaround cycle was spot on, and we were able to, that helped us get through the whole environment. And, I think just being Navy guys, we were able to be flexible and adjust to the environment. One of the things that, we went over there, talked about the loadout. We adjusted that as we went along, but we also adjusted how many aircraft went out. Initially, Tarps missions would go out, and you'd have a wingman for the Tarps mission, or you'd have a cap, you'd have a section of F-14s on the Tarp. After a while, we were running out of air crew who could stay awake. We were running out of aircraft who could be maintained. And so by the end, we were flying single missions, overland cap with one aircraft, or the Tarps mission just going out alone and unafraid with nobody on his wing,
but still armed. So
absolutely. But it goes against everything that you learn
yes.
In the turnaround cycle. It's always, you're always there with two aircraft, and we learned, well, in this environment, it's okay not to do it that way. So I think that was a big eye-opening experience for a lot of people who were, thinking that, okay, we need to do it by the book, and then learn that, hey, we just need to be flexible and get the mission done.
Yeah, it was interesting if you think, sort of foreshadow later, when I went out to the Top Gun staff and we started thinking differently about how you employ an air wing, you went really to a strike fighter mindset. I think early on, we were doing much longer strike packages, right? The classic fighter sweep, and then the strike package comes in. I think once we figured out that there really wasn't much of an air-to-air threat. But, a reminder, when you're going over, I mean, the Iraqi armed forces on paper look pretty formidable. They really sophisticated integrated air defense, lots of aircraft, a lot of troops, all that stuff. And so I think had we not gone in with such overwhelming firepower and fought the war the way that we did, it certainly could have been different. So I think that was the right way to employ the U.S. Armed Forces from a historical perspective. But, we're going over doing a lot of studying of the different systems and such. So I think trying to really make sure we understood what was going on. But again, after that first week or two, when it became clear that we at least owned the airspace, then we started compressing the strike packages, because then you want to minimize your vulnerability over the targets. We really started thinking differently about strike fighter tactics, and I think that really informed how we thought how the modern air wing, I think, does deploy itself. But yeah, I think it was dependent on the time frame and the mission set and kind of what we were tasked to do.
Awesome. Well, what's interesting, you think back, I just wondered if you guys could even imagine back 1991, you're just wrapping up February 1991. You've just been, you've been going to war with Iraq, like ceasing hostilities. Could you imagine that a dozen years later, we would actually have bases on the ground, and we'd have, dudes going overseas to do, 6 months on the ground in Iraq, in Al Assad? I mean, could you even imagine such a thing back then?
Well, it was, it would have been hard to imagine. However, right about that time is when we started going back to Vietnam, and, the relations were turning, because I know when I was a young JO, I could never imagine someone going to Vietnam, that an American, that we'd ever be friendly with Vietnam. And so the same type thing. But so I could see, there's always something out there. Things will always change. But when you're flying over on hostile flights, it's hard to imagine that someday you would actually be on the ground there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do have an interesting question. So, there are three, sometimes four carriers in the Gulf, right? Everything's a little confusing. You hear the stories. Did you ever almost land on the wrong boat?
No, never me.
There was a pause. There was a definite pause. He's like, what's almost?
I know a guy, who almost did. But I tell you what, you had to pay attention, right? Because maybe the nav systems were on from the carrier, maybe they weren't. Now we had the benefit. The TR was the big daddy, and it also didn't smoke. So I would always do like, okay, is it the right? Is it in the right position? Does it got smoke coming? Is it big? Oh, it's big. Good. That's probably a good sign as compared to, some of the carriers were, on a relative basis, much smaller.
Yeah.
And we didn't smoke
when you say smoke, you're talking about conventional versus nuke.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So that's right. The TR was a nuke ship. So it didn't have smoke coming out of the stack. Woody and I were trying to remember, we talked last week, is like, I swear that we had an aircraft from another Airwing trap aboard the TR. And I know it happened somewhere in the Persian Gulf. It wasn't our ship; it was another one. And that's like that. It was tough, right? Because all of a sudden you're there, and now that aircraft is captive to that Airwing, and they're going to put stickers and zappers and paint and all that kind of stuff. So
I know as a Rio, that was my primary job when we would come into the break to circle the land the daytime. As soon as a pilot did his 90 degree to the left, I would look down and make sure I'd find the right number.
Exactly.
Make sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. 71 looks good. Oh crap! It says 67. Yeah. We're out of here.
Like, get it. Right off. Exactly. Get out.
Just kidding. See ya.
They're going, hey boss, can we take him? Can we take him?
Make a ready deck. We got to get this guy.
Exactly.
That's right. Oh yeah.
But it was cool. And then, as Woody said earlier, at the end, the America came over, so we had 4 aircraft carriers. And it's like having 4 aircraft carriers in Lake Erie, right? Probably actually Lake Erie's bigger. But we did this fantastic photo shoot, after Desert Storm. We had all 4 carriers in this diamond formation, kind of cruising, and we got all sorts of great photos. But that was super impressive. It was kind of cool too, as Woody said earlier. You got a bunch of your friends that you went through flight training with or knew, and then are sharing stories in the years after. But there was a lot of folks that you knew operating in that same tight environment at the same time. It was really, really kind of challenging, but also pretty cool.
That's awesome.
That is cool.
That sounds like fun.
Hey Fuzzy, you said you were at Top Gun in the mid '90s, and it makes me think about Brad Elward's recent book about Top Gun, the legacy, and he talked about Desert Storm influencing Top Gun and naval aviation training. Can you shed some light on that? SFTI program
sure.
and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we alluded to it earlier. So Desert Storm, it was my first cruise. I did the 93 cruise where we did most of our operations in Bosnia. Another really we were in the Adriatic, so another super tight environment. And there was actually a bunch of us from CAG 8 that had gone through Top Gun together as students in 92 between cruises, and then went to the staff afterwards. So everybody that was on the staff, I was there from 93 to 97, which included shutting down Miramar and moving up to Fallon. But I think there were 2 big things that came together then. One was just rethinking, the battle space, the weapon systems. That was really, Top Gun's about training the trainers, and you've talked about that in previous sessions, of making sure that we're sending the best air crews back to their units to train. But it's also about thinking into the future about, what's the battle space going to look like? How are we going to employ our weapon systems, et cetera? So we spent a lot of time thinking about that, and our back and forth to Fallon helped us do that. But we really rethought the idea that we were going to have these classic employment of the fighter sweep and then the strike package. A6s went away. The F-14 became a really good strike fighter asset itself. So we really rethought how we were going to employ the Airwing, and it really became a strike fighter mindset. And that was a whole different set of tactics and thinking about what we did with the aircraft and with the air wings. That was sort of thing number 1 that shaped it. Thing number 2 was, and Slammer talked about this, was just thinking about, especially when we went to Fallon and then Top Gun became part of the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center, was how do we think differently about training and making sure that we're at an air wing and a squadron and a 4-ship, 2-ship level. How are we making sure we're best trained? When I went through Top Gun, the course was, I think, 5, maybe 6 weeks, right? It was really kind of the old Top Gun, which was a lot of air to air,
Probably 5.
Fantastic training. And that's why I started to really understand how to fly the F-14. It wasn't really until I joined the Top Gun staff that I figured out how to really get better at it. But we also thought about how do we best train folks, and folks like Crunch, who came at the end of the squadron tour, much more seasoned. And then we created not just a longer program, and it was at that point 12 weeks, much more in depth. It wasn't just fighter, it was strike fighter, so much longer syllabus, covering all these different ways that we were going to deploy the aircraft. But it was also making sure that the Crunches of the world were ready to go to their now new roles as strike fighter tactics instructors, not maintenance officers. They were geared to actually go back and train their squadrons and train the Airwing. So it's really two important things that came together in the mid-90s, was a change in the way we employed the Airwing and also a change in the way we thought about the curriculum. And those two things came together, I think, in a really powerful way with the Strike Fighter Tactics instructor program that Crunch is, sort of evidence number one, is a great example of the modern Top Gun instructor.
Yeah, I tell you, it's an incredible program. And I remember you guys were the very first graduates were coming to the fleet right about the time I was coming to the fleet right about the time I was coming to the fleet, maybe in the RAG. I was really young, and I was able to benefit from it because the folks that you had trained as part of the SFTI program were now instructing at the RAG. They were instructing at SWAT Slam or the Strike Fighter Weapons to Atlantic. And so we were going through the new program. We were learning more, and wow, it was, you could just tell that there was even the people who were just a couple of years senior to me did not have that as much as I did. And it was really good. And of course it got better. The longer it went, it just kept getting better and better. And now I don't know what they do now. They probably split the atom as part of the course. I don't know.
I'm sure. Yeah. But that, I do believe that was super transformative. But it was like any organizational shift and cultural shift. It was not without its challenges, right? Because Top Gun was the domain of the F-14, for the first couple of decades, and then now it was the domain of the strike fighter, and the F-18 became more prevalent. And so they mean different communities, different missions, different attitudes. So it was definitely an interesting time to be on the staff, and the move out of Miramar up to Fallon, which I think operationally was great, but it definitely, the O Club at Fallon was not the O Club at Miramar. So, it was different, but it was really interesting experience, and one that I now that I'm out, as we all are in the real world doing other things, I reflect on that a lot, all the lessons, organizational leadership lessons that we had to employ to kind of get where we wanted to get to with all the Fallon stuff we were doing.
Yeah. Fallon was a great place for Top Gun, just to be clear. I mean, you blast off the runway, and if you're going up to Bravo 20, it's like 19.3 miles to the center of the range. I mean, you get up there, you do your fence checks, and you're like, "Oh, I'm out of the back end of the range. I got to turn around," and fight's on, and you go. And I mean, you could fight almost down to the low fuel lights, Bravo 17 and Bravo 20, and just go right into the break. It was absolutely amazing, which you couldn't do in the Papa areas off of Miramar. I mean, you had
all that being said, I was glad I was there when it was at Miramar.
Well, okay, so story time. This is so story time. So I go through the Top Gun. I'm there as a student. I get done. I'm like, I get done with it, and I look at the skipper. I'm like, hey, I need to go get married, so I'm going to drop some vacation here. Boom. So I take some leave, go get married, take my wife on a honeymoon. We come back, and they're like, all right, Crunch, boom, go get your Hornet Qual, do that. And they say, we're going down to Miramar for a 1v1 det. I'm like, great. So we jump in the car. I'm of course junior bro, so I don't get a fly off spot. So jump in my wife's little Toyota Celica with her, and we're like, wah! It's like a lawnmower all the way down from Fallon down to San Diego. We get down there, we have a great little time. We're driving, and she's driving around, and she's, we're East Coast people. She's like, so this is San Diego, huh? Now, and she goes, Top Gun used to be here. Is that right? I say that's right. It was. And she says, and how long ago was that? I'm like, it was about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Wasn't that long ago? So let me get this straight. I'm like, yeah, that's right. It's exactly what it was. So we had a great time in Fallon. It's a great place to live, for sure. It's not San Diego. It doesn't have the traffic, but San Diego is amazing, of course.
Yeah.
But the ranges in Fallon are incredible.
Oh yeah, I had the best of both worlds. I got 3 years on the staff in Miramar, and then I got a year on the staff in Fallon, then almost 3 years at the OPSO and C of the adversary unit. So for me, it was great. I think the spouses, my wife Julie, still loves San Diego, and all the spouses were sad, but all the guys were like, let's go, Fallon's amazing.
It's great stuff. Great stuff. All right.
You guys got anything? You got any final comments on Desert Storm that we didn't ask you about? Or I think you guys gave an excellent overview. I mean, focusing on the Tomcat, touching on the big picture, a lot of reality. So, any final thoughts? Not required, but
yeah. I just want to give a shout out to the rest of our VF-84 Jolly Roger Bubbas. We actually got together last summer in Austin at one of our squadron mates' house. Had a great time. We were planning to get together this spring in Pensacola, so we still keep in touch, and it was a great group of guys to be with.
Crunch, were you ever in VF-84?
I was not.
Neither was I. So we're going to have to think about cutting that out. But
well, you guys are welcome. You can be honorary Jolly Rogers.
All right. Well, I'll just throw this out. VF-31. There's a bunch of us that are getting together in Memorial Day down in like Austin or something. So there.
Yeah.
I think that's not even funny.
I think I reflect back and just think about, again, way back at the beginning of the conversation, being the brand new nugget at the squadron, and we just had such a great group of folks, and from Streak to Woodie and Crow. I mean, I have a ton of experience in the senior JOs. I mean, it's really cool to reflect back that we, young knucklehead like me, can show up in that unit, and 5 months later, we're in theater and things generally work pretty well. I think we did a great job. So I think it's really kudos to the whole system, the whole program, and the team. But it's a great group of folks, and as Woody said, we still stay in touch. And the other piece, and it'd be worth in a future conversation, we've only hinted at it, but the mission set that we did after Desert Storm, the Provide Comfort, which was all the support of the Kurdish refugees being pushed north out of Iraq. I mean, that's a bit of history that I think a lot of people have forgotten. And we had a kind of a front row seat to that, where they basically went from living in Iraq and Mosul and getting pushed out, and they went from one tent where they were living in the very north part of Iraq to like hundreds of thousands of refugees. So it was kind of a, if you will, a harbinger of what happened in Syria and other places. To me, and I reflect back on that cruise, it was the kinetics of Desert Storm, but then it was really challenging mission set to support all that, but also just kind of a front seat to history, and then not being active when we invaded Iraq in 2003. It was harder, I think, to watch it on CNN and not be there than it was to be there and actually be involved in it. So anyhow, for future conversation, that whole Provide Comfort and what happened after Desert Storm, I think, was really important as well.
Hey, you did mention the cradle of civilization that time, so
exactly.
Okay, so what are you guys doing now? Let's start with the senior guy, Fuzzy, as you mentioned earlier. So Woody, what are you guys doing now? What are you doing now?
I'm on the faculty at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey in the Department of Information Sciences. I'm what's called a research associate, so 100% of my time is doing research, primarily on new technologies, new systems. We take a look at them, evaluate them, analyze them before they're sent out to the fleet. In fact, one of my projects that's starting this year is working with Top Gun on some data link messaging systems. And so we'll be starting that later this month. We'll go for a year. I also work with the students who are here to get in Monterey. Yes, it's a tough life, but someone's got to live here. But they're getting their master's degrees, so I work with them on their master's thesis project. So that is what I'm doing these days.
Man,
it's impressive.
Yeah,
nice.
Fuzzy.
I left active duty in '99. I was having a great time, but medically my flying options got limited, so I decided to transition out into the quote unquote real world. Went to business school, and then for the last 20 years, I've been starting technology companies, investing in technology companies, running technology companies, and then about 3 years ago, I was inspired by Woodie about the life of the academic, and I joined the faculty at Harvard Business School, where I had gone through and got my MBA back in the 2001 timeframe. So I've been teaching on the faculty there. I teach entrepreneurship and finance and different courses related to starting companies, especially high tech and science based companies. So I do that about half time, and then I'm sitting on boards and helping the next generation of leaders and founders that are starting companies and growing companies. So it's pretty cool, and I constantly learning. I think it's really neat to see these new and young leaders, doing things that I couldn't imagine, and so it's fun to be part of that.
Yeah, you guys are awesome. A couple of overachievers. Well done.
I feel somewhat inadequate.
Same, Crunch. I'm right with you.
All right, gents. Hey, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate your time. This has been, what are we at now? Almost an hour 20, almost an hour and a half, I think. So what a great conversation, great discussion. Really appreciate the insight. I think our audience is going to love it. We love the stories, and thank you for joining us. Over to you, Bio.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. I was in the Pentagon for Desert Storm, so I haven't spent a lot of time talking to anybody here in the Tomcat War Stories. So you guys filled in for me, and like Crunch says, I think the audience is going to love it too. So thanks for taking the time to spend with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And we're glad to be here. Yeah, on behalf of our squadron and everybody else that was over there. I mean, everybody has their own stories, but you guys are doing a great job with this podcast. So thanks for doing it. It's been super fun to get back into remembering those days. So thank you for doing this.
Appreciate your time, guys.
All right. Thanks, gents. Appreciate it. Hey, Bio, what a great episode that was. I really enjoy hearing old war stories from guys, like Fuzzy and Woodie. So, as we've said several times, they were in VF-84, the Jolly Rogers. So although it's not the oldest fighter squadron, the Jolly Rogers is probably the most iconic. I mean, I've said it before, when I was a kid, probably just like everybody else, I had a model of an F-4 Phantom painted up with the skull and bones from the Jolly Rogers. And I'm sure, and I know that I made a Tomcat model. I'm pretty sure it was a VF 84 jet. I believe it was. The thing I do remember about that was I distinctly remember using too much glue and having those wings stuck out at 20 degrees in the model. We've all been there. If you built a Tomcat, you know what I mean? You just use a little too much and this thing gets stuck. But in any case, it had the VF 84. It had because you would pull off those little decals and you put that stripe down the side of the fuselage, right? That angled stripe with the arrows. And it just looks so stinking cool. I bring that up because it's so fun to talk with guys who are actually in probably the most iconic squadron out there doing the work in 1991.
Yeah, that was a cool episode. I agree with you. What I thought was fascinating was thinking about the guys in the squadron and on the ship when they were on their way over. And this, everybody knew the crisis was building and it was building to a point of combat. I'm just trying to imagine the feeling as they were anticipating going into combat. Also, the fact that their combat missions probably were not what they were expecting. But it had to be, scary, exciting, all that stuff at the same time. And those guys, Woodie and Fuzzy, brought it out nicely. Hey, let me change topics and say thank you, a sincere thank you from all of us here at the F-14 Tomcast for those who generously contributed in response to our pledge drive in the last episode. We will scroll the names of people who contributed more than $5 in just a moment. Also, one more thing, and I'm going to look at my notes here. We have a few extra large F-14 Tomcast golf shirts remaining. So take a look in the episode description for this episode to see the status if they are still remaining. Here you go. If you're interested, the first step is to send an email to questions@f14tomcast.com and put polo shirt in the title, in the subject of the email. The cost is $45 for shirts mailed to addresses in the United States, $70 per shirt mailed to Europe. And in Australia, it's about $110, and let me verify the postage. Again, if you are interested, send an email expressing your interest and let me get back to you to tell you how to pay for it and confirm the shirts' availability. Extra large is the only size we have remaining. Thanks for those who have supported the F-14 Tomcats so far. I hope you enjoy those shirts.
So what a great episode that was. I really appreciate everybody listening today.
You've been listening to the F-14 Tomcast, part of the Air Combat Experience, brought to you by BVR Productions. Got a question for the show? Send an email to questions@f14tomcast.com or leave a message on our listener line at 877-MACH-101, extension 3. That's 877-622-4101, extension 3. For updates on this podcast and our other military aviation themed shows, visit bvrpro.com and follow the Air Combat Experience on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for listening.